Hey, I'm Jason Wendroff-Rodnicki. I'm a body-centered grief therapist, and I love having really honest conversations about grief and loss so that people don't feel alone in their grief. Um, I am so excited that I'm going to be speaking at the Grief Awareness and Education Conference, which is Saturday, September 20th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. I will include the Eventbrite link in the comments. And the Grief Awareness and Education Conference aims to provide meaningful insight and strategies to navigate grief, loss, and bereavement within the context of personal and organizational change. Through inspiring presentations and actionable takeaways, we seek to foster a deep understanding of these universal experiences and empower attendees to embrace change with resilience and empathy. And I am so happy to be here today with Susie Sarkisian, a family support coach who helps people navigate the often emotional and complex journey of caring for aging loved ones. With over 15 years of experience in senior living and more than a decade of supporting families, Susie brings deep compassion and insight to her work. After walking alongside her own parents through her father Levy's body dementia,
Louis body.
Lewy body, thank you, Lewy body's dementia, Susie discovered her true calling supporting the supporters. She now works with adult children, siblings, and caregiving spouses to help make the experience of aging not only manageable, but meaningful. So, welcome, Susie.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, one of the main themes of the conference is embracing change. So, how does embracing change look for you, especially when you're working with with the supporters of aging parents?
Embracing change. So what happens in aging families, as many people know, my own experience with my dad is not unique, but what happens is often a diagnosis can land, and that sort of becomes a game changer in family dynamics and in the roles that people take, or it simply can happen through aging.
Mm.
So someone can have a parent who used to be a school principal and in charge of decision making and things like that, and now they've become someone who's incapable of doing the things that they once defined themselves by. So when when a family is rocked by the changes that happen with aging, whether it's through a diagnosis or normal aging, um, these changes that happen have an impact on everyone around them. And often they can trigger grief. And the kind of grief that I will be talking about is not the grief of an actual loss. There's an impending loss coming, but sometimes it's the grief of who the person used to be
Mm.
and who they are now. So when families are seeing these two things side by side, it it can be really, really hard and lonely.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Like, as a bereaved sibling myself, as soon as my sister Lauren passed, my identity was rocked to the core, my own identity, and the way even I had to look at my parents, because everything started to shift in that family dynamics.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
it's really it's important to make sure that we're looking at those identities and embracing the changes, not only within ourselves, but also within the aging parents.
Right. And there's times where you may think, oh gosh, if something happens to one of my parents, I know exactly what I'm going to do. But the reality is, we don't often know the role that we're going to play until we're in the scenario.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and especially around that anticipatory part of it, right? Like we never really know what's going to happen until it happens. So many people in even my clients tell me that I was anticipating the death to happen, and the way I respond to the anticipation is very different to the way they react to the death itself.
right, right. I remember when my father died. So my dad had what's called Lewy body dementia. It's actually the second most common dementia. It's like a cross between Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but it's shorter lived than a typical Alzheimer's type dementia. And I can remember that when he finally passed away, my mother, she wasn't doing a lot of crying. And I remember asking her about that. And she said, I've been grieving for the last 7 years.
Mm,
So for her, her grief was happening all along.
yeah.
And then at the time that he passed away, it was a sense of relief for her.
Gotcha.
Um, so yeah, that's where my input on grief comes into this conference and on change.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, it sounds like that. I know when my sister passed, I had to sort of almost bypass my own grief because, as any bereaved sibling knows and always hears all the time, is that they have to be strong for their parents because, when you have sibling grief and they lost a child, most people in society think that the child now has to take care of the parent. Um,
mm.
is there something similar that sort of, it sounds somewhat similar, but also different than the experience that I went through?
There's no one way that I could say yes. It's not always that the child takes care of the parent or vice versa. There's parents who expect their children to step up. There's parents who don't want to bother their children,
Mm.
and then there are, I say children, but we're talking about adults here. We're
Yeah.
talking about people in their 40s and 50s. It's a weird term in the senior living world, this term called adult children. I wish there was a better name for it. But the what happens to, the roles that we take can change. They can cause resentment. They can sometimes it's very surprising who ends up being the caring person in the family and who ends up being the one that can't watch
Right.
what's happening. So as much as you might think maybe the person who's the lawyer in the family is the one that's going to handle legal affairs, that might be the one who would so much rather cook a meal and sit with someone and hold their hand.
Mm.
But what happens, especially with dementia, and it could be with other illness too, is a person slowly loses so much of who they are. So this change that happens before the eyes of those around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was more specifically asking. I know everybody's grief is different, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody's grief takes a very, very different, you know, flavor. Even in the bereaved sibling world, like some of the living siblings get really close. Sometimes they push away. I
Mm-hmm.
find that it's a lot of times it's a magnifying glass for what's already there. And so if you had a great relationship you may have a fantastic one, and if your relationship was a little fragmented, it's going to get even more fragmented. I was actually asking in your own personal story and your own personal experience,
Oh,
like what was your role and how did it shift?
well, so my role happened to have been limited by geography.
Hmm.
So I live in Connecticut. My family's from North Carolina, and I am a doer, a fixer. I want to be there and solve things, yet I couldn't be there to solve things. I'm 800 or 900 miles away. And so the role I ended up taking was supporting my mother,
Hmm.
who was caring for my dad. My brothers, two of my brothers who were local, showed up in the way that they showed up. It wasn't the way I wanted them to show up, but they showed up the way that they could show up. So there was time when it caused a rift between us because they weren't doing it the way I thought they should, and maybe they thought, well, you aren't here, so what say do you have um, in this? So yes, I did see family dynamic change and shift and come to a point of acceptance is another part of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell me more about like did acceptance in what way?
Accepting how we all contribute.
Okay.
So I have one brother who is very financially secure, and his way of contributing was to keep opening his wallet.
Okay.
Um, but it was frustrating to me because I wanted him to be there. So I didn't understand that as
Yeah.
much, and now I've reached a point where I do. And another, often in families when one parent is ill or changing,
Mm,
changing with a dementia diagnosis, the siblings might sort of want to come in and tell their mother or their other parent how to do things. So, we all respond to change differently. And until we stop and look in the
yeah.
mirror and go, oh, this is how I show up. Oh, this is how that person shows up.
Yeah.
And my way isn't the only way. Part of accepting change is accepting that we all respond differently.
100%. And also, you can change the meaning. Like, I love the idea of changing the meaning that we give things, right? Like, when you're saying, oh, your brother shows up like he's financially set and he showed up by opening his wallet, right? Well, that's showing who he is, right? Like, it's not, and it's when you shift it from, oh, right, that's how he's showing his love and support. Because that's what he knows, and that's the way his love and support is expressed financially, where you wanted it to be through his presence, through his, physically being there, but you're kind of expecting him to be someone he's not. And once you can,
Exactly.
right? And I think we do that with our parents too as they age, and even
Yep.
especially as they go through, I would imagine, dementia. Now, my parents, I've never been through that experience, but I would imagine that is a difficult thing to be present with, or I should say, have some tricky qualities to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's like what you've just said about bereaved siblings. Roles change. All of a sudden, you're parenting a parent.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're in a role where you feel like you must make decisions for a parent who's raised you.
Hmm.
So this is all that sort of change and going, wait, maybe I'm not all the way right on this. Maybe it's not my job to come in like a bull in a china shop and tell my parent what to do.
Right.
Maybe I need to listen a little better. Maybe I need to understand what this is like for them
Yeah.
before I give my opinion.
Yeah.
Um,
So what advice can you give to the supporters of, someone who's going through like dementia? Like, is there like one thing that you noticed that you can give?
yeah, patience is really important, and rather than talking to or at someone, try to just show up and meet them where they are.
Mm.
So rather than coming in and saying, here's what you need to do and here's what we're going to do, if someone's having a hard day, be in the hard day with them.
That sounds like just a great life lesson. Never mind, I think that's a good piece of advice for everybody. Just take a
It,
moment and listen to people and like
yep.
shut up for a second. Keep your opinion to yourself and let that person have their moment and just be there to listen to that moment.
You can learn so much from someone with Alzheimer's. People say, oh, my mom doesn't remember if she had breakfast or whatever. I'm like, does that even matter? It doesn't matter. If your mom is happy when you get there to visit her, how about just being happy with her in that moment and not drilling her about what she had for breakfast or
Oh,
what she did yesterday? Just being in the moment. You can learn so much about how to be present and be in the moment by being with someone who has cognitive decline.
yeah. I mean, I would imagine you would also learn so much about yourself and the patterns that you engage in,
Mhm.
because you, just taking the time of being some in with someone who may not, understand time or
Mhm.
or remember what happened 15 minutes ago, but can
Right.
maybe recall something that happened 30 years ago.
And wow. And to me, or I try to let people know, I go, hey, if they can remember something that happened 30 years ago, there there's a little chance to go down memory lane.
Yeah.
So say, tell me about the apple pie your mom used to make. Let's hear about it, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, it's so interesting what you're saying that because I remember I used to back in my younger days, I used to work in an inpatient psychiatric facility. And there was one guy, I'll never forget this guy. I mean, he definitely had some psychosis going on, but he would say some really outlandish things like, oh, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And the psychiatrist would be like, would just write it off and medicate him. I'm like, but what if he is like getting some information that we don't know about. Like, who's to say, like, we're judging that person thinking that they're, quote, crazy. But, what if maybe they're just misinterpreting the information that they're getting? It may
Mhm.
not be, right? And so let's look at people with compassion. And, as you said, just take a moment and meet them where they're at. Like, enjoy, if they remember that apple pie, go down that road with them.
Yeah,
And
if they're in long-term memory, if
yeah,
someone is only in long-term memory and they're talking about their childhood like their mother's still alive, that's a gift.
yeah,
Go there with them. Learn about how their mother, what their nickname was as a child, rather than spending time bringing someone back to the present saying, no, this is Monday and it's 2025. Like, I'm not so sure what the point of orienting someone is. If
right.
they're in long term, they've just given you a gift to go on a little trip with them.
And enjoy the journey, because then you're really respecting them for where they are. And it's like just falling in love with the moment. We so often, the thing that causes most of us pain is that we resist what is actually happening. Like, we want to say that we're happy, but sometimes we're not happy. And if we can honor our real feelings, our real emotions as they're happening in the moment without living in the past, without living in the future. I mean, I think that is an absolute gift. And it's a great practice of being present. As a yoga instructor, it's all about coming back to the present moment. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that is such a gift to be able to do that and to really be there with somebody as they're making that transition too. Like that, they're
But
going
and it's not as easy as it sounds. I think there has to be a grieving process.
for sure.
I had a man on a support group the other day, and he said he was telling me that his wife is a speech was a speech therapist, and now she has no words.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
he's watching this woman who has no words. So there's a grieving that must happen in order for him to then be able to have enjoyable visits with her.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, right. But the grief is about him processing the emotion, not about his wife, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and I think I always say that, when we're grieving, sometimes it's a little, and this word can be a little bit sticky, and I'm very aware of that, but sometimes I think it's a little selfish of grieving because, and that's about me. It's about me missing what was and not embracing what is. And so I would think my relationship with my sister, she would want me to be happy. She would want me to go have fun and experience and just like kind of suck all the juice out of life. And
Mm-hmm.
when I'm upset about her not being here, right, that holds me apart from that. And
Mm.
she's in a place, I do believe she's in a place where it is like just and movement of energy. She's in a different place, and if I have to acknowledge her from where she is, not from where I wished that she was, right? So
Mm-hmm.
does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love what you just said. I love the part that I wrote it down when you said falling in love with the moment. I think that's beautiful. And I think you're brave for saying there's a little bit of selfishness in grieving. And I I see that. I
Yeah.
see that.
Well, and so many people too. And like, listen, it's taken me a long time to get here. So, like, if
Mm-hmm.
for anybody that's listening that's in the early stages, just put a pin in what I just said, because in the beginning, it's not that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of work. It takes some effort that you have to put in and learning your patterns, right? Looking at your family dynamics and putting everything into place so that you do have to grieve. You do have to go through the muck, and you have to go through the rough emotional landscape in order to be able to do that. But the more quickly I think you can do that, the
Mm-hmm.
better off you'll be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when people say, "Oh, just grief doesn't have a timeline," and yeah, I mean, I've seen people in like really serious acute states of grief for many, many years, and the grief does last a while, but the pain doesn't have to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you have to put work into it.
Right. Right.
Awesome.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share about, like, what is your talk going to be about? We'll kind of, kind of sort of coming back to the conference.
Yeah. So I would say my talk is about the ambiguous grief or anticipatory grief. They're two three-syllable words that start with an A. Um, both of those, the grief that happens while someone is alive, that happens through aging or a diagnosis. Um, and I think most common is the cognitive diagnoses, like a dementia. But it could also be the grieving of a physical illness as well.
And for someone who doesn't understand, like, how would you describe the difference between ambiguous grief and anticipatory grief? Just
So ambiguous grief is and these are trendy terms, I
yeah,
guess. Ambiguous,
that's why I asked the question, because
yeah,
like all those words get thrown out and
yep,
nobody actually defines them. So, or at
right.
least
So
that is
ambiguous grief is it's or they call it ambiguous loss or ambiguous grief that goes by both of those. That's the grieving of someone who is still here.
yeah,
So the person is still on this earth and you are grieving them, like my mother was doing for 7 years with my dad, grieving him, grieving him, grieving. My dad taught a memory course. I mean, the irony of all these things. My dad taught a memory course and then he lost his mind. So that's ambiguous grief. The grieving that happens when someone is still here and they haven't left the earth yet. Anticipatory grief is sort of what it sounds like, people going, oh my gosh, the end is coming, the end is coming, I know this is going to happen. And people can get themselves to a state of grieving before a loss.
Mhm.
And I've found that when I've run groups about anticipatory grief, I have some people that have said, for example, their parent has moved out of the home and lives in a facility, or their spouse has moved out of the home and lives in a facility. And some people have gone ahead and gotten rid of all the clothes
Yeah.
because they said, my husband's never going to wear these suits again. The reality is, and so they are anticipating the end. They've got everything all laid out, ready for the end to happen, waiting for that phone call,
Mm.
right? And then there's others who are not anticipating and have a closet full of shoes and clothes and won't touch them
Yeah, yeah.
until the person leaves. So we all do these things differently. So anticipatory is expecting it to happen and maybe laying things out, or maybe choosing not to lay things out and saying, I'll handle that day when that day comes.
Yep.
Um,
That's awesome. Well, and as you were saying about like your dad had memory issues, and it's funny that um he like wound up losing his memory, right? Like he taught
mhm,
memory classes.
yep,
And it just got me thinking, like, the possibility of the manifestation of his illness. It maybe he taught memory courses because on some intuitive level he may have known, like memory issues
possibly.
were coming, right? Like, because our biggest challenge is always the thing that motivates us the most, right? And
It's
you said
possible.
that a couple of times, where maybe we were talking about even before we started recording about how uh, some the speech pathologist wound up having no words at the end, right? Like, so there's that tie of their life's work and how they transition, right? Like they've transitioned maybe in harmony with the work that they've loved for their whole life.
Mhm. And people can change so drastically through a cognitive diagnosis.
Hmm.
I have worked with so many people said my mother never said a swear word in her life and now she's swearing all the time. So people can change tremendously through a cognitive diagnosis, and that's really hard on people who've always known someone to be a certain way,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or on a relationship that used to be a certain way and now it's different
Yeah.
you know
Well, and I mean, and that's a beautiful learn. Like that. I mean, to me, I'm still working on my life right now, like how to look at those situations that, I think it should be one way, but it's totally not. And how do I embrace going back to embracing change, right? Like, how do we embrace that change without it causing so much disruption in our experience?
hmm hmm
Awesome.
yep.
Yeah, and I think that brings it around full circle.
I think it does. I think
Yeah.
it,
So
yeah.
yeah, I am we are both very excited. I can't wait to actually meet you in person in September. And we're as I said, the Grief Awareness and Education Conference is September 20th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Check the link for the Eventbrite link and how to get signed up and for more information.
All
Thank
right.
you so much, Susie. And this was an awesome conversation. I love talking about, different modalities and helping people deal with their grief.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Awesome. I appreciate you too. And we all appreciate you. And I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.